The dugout smelled like rotting leaves and old blood. Private First Class Harry Kelsen presses back against a sandbag wall, listening to the rain hammer the jungle canopy above. It was October 1944, somewhere on the northern ridges of Leyte Island, Philippines, and the position he'd been ordered to hold had a nickname among the men, Dead Man's Perch. The Japanese controlled the valley below. They controlled the slopes to the east. They controlled the supply trail that wound through the bamboo thickets, just 200 yards downhill. Every soldier who'd been assigned this forward observation post in the past 3 weeks had either been killed, dragged away wounded, or evacuated in shock. The last man to occupy this foxhole, a kid from Ohio named Delaney, had lasted 9 hours before a grenade took half his face. Now it was Harry's turn. His platoon sergeant had looked at him with something close to pity when he gave the order. "Just hold it till sundown," the sergeant had said. "After that, we'll see." Everyone knew what that meant. After sundown, if Harry was still alive, they'd count a miracle. If you believe stories like this shouldn't vanish with time, subscribe. Let's keep their memory alive together. Harry Kelsen wasn't supposed to be here. He'd grown up in a quiet corner of rural Minnesota, the second son of a dairy farmer who believed in early mornings, hard work, and not asking too many questions. Harry had spent his childhood walking fence lines, herding cattle, and hunting white-tailed deer in the woods behind the property. He wasn't the biggest kid in school. He wasn't the fastest or the strongest, but he had patience. He could sit motionless in a deer stand for hours, breathing slowly, watching the tree line, waiting for the exact right moment to squeeze the trigger. His father used to say Harry could outweigh a stone. That patience, that quiet discipline, was what kept him alive when the war came calling. He'd been drafted in the spring of 1943, trained at Camp Roberts in California, and shipped out to Pacific Theater with the 96th Infantry Division in the summer of 1944. By the time they landed on Leyte, he'd already seen combat on smaller islands, already learned that war wasn't glory or adventure. It was mud and fear and the sick metallic taste of adrenaline that never quite left your mouth. But nothing had prepared him for this. Nothing had prepared him for being told to sit in a hole and wait to die. The position itself was a nightmare. It was a shallow trench carved into the side of a ridge, barely deep enough to crouch in, reinforced with sandbags that were already rotting from the humidity. The jungle pressed in on all sides, thick with vines and ferns and trees, so dense you couldn't see more than 30 feet in any direction. Visibility was almost zero. The Japanese had the high ground to the north and controlled the trails below. They knew exactly where this foxhole was. They'd been probing for days, testing the defenses, sending scouts to map firing angles. It was only a matter of time before they launched a full assault. The position was supposed to serve as an early warning post, a tripwire to alert the main defensive line if the enemy tried to flank from a valley. But in practice, it was a death trap. The men called it a suicide post because that's what it was. You sat there exposed, cut off, and waited for the inevitable. Harry understood all this. He understood the odds. But he also understood something else. If he was going to die here, he was going to make it cost him. He spent the first hour surveying his field of fire. The trench faced downhill toward a narrow trail that switched back to the jungle. To his left was a stand of bamboo, dense and rustling in the wind. To his right, the ground dropped away into a gully choked with ferns. Directly ahead, maybe 50 yards out, was a clearing where the canopy thinned, and you could see patches of sky. That clearing was the kill zone. Anyone crossing it would be exposed for 3, maybe 4 seconds. Not long, but enough. Harry marked the distances in his mind. 50 yards to the clearing, 70 yards to the bamboo thicket, 90 yards to the trail junction where the path split toward the Japanese lines. He memorized the angles, the sight lines, the spots where movement would give an enemy away. Then he began to prepare. He had his M1 Garand rifle, 8 rounds in the clip, and 6 extra clips in his belt. He had 2 fragmentation grenades, a canteen, a small entrenching tool, and a combat knife. Not much, but it would have to be enough. He used the entrenching tool to widen the trench slightly, piling the dirt in front to create a low berm that would give him a few extra inches of cover. He cut branches from the surrounding brush and wove them into the sandbags, creating natural camouflage that would break up his silhouette. He scattered leaves across the lip of the trench so it would blend into the jungle floor. Then he settled in to wait. The rain stopped around mid-morning. The jungle steamed in the sudden heat, moisture rising in thick curtain from the ground. Insects swarmed. Mosquitoes clustered around Harry's face and neck, but he didn't move to brush them away. Movement attracted attention. Movement got you killed. He sat perfectly still, rifle resting across his knees, eyes scanning the tree line. Hours passed. The jungle was never silent. Birds called from the canopy. Monkeys chattered in the distance. Branches creaked and swayed in the breeze. But Harry had learned to distinguish natural sounds from human ones. He listened for the snap of a twig under a boot, the scrape of metal on wood, the faint rustle of fabric against leaves. He listened for the things that didn't belong. And then, just after noon, he heard it, a soft clink, like a canteen hitting a rifle stock. Somewhere downhill, maybe 80 yards out, hidden in the bamboo. Harry didn't move. He kept his breathing slow and shallow, his eyes fixed on the bamboo thicket. Seconds ticked by. Then he saw it. A flicker of movement, low to the ground, a shadow shifting through the stalks. One man, moving carefully, testing the approach. A scout. Harry watched him edge forward, pausing every few steps to listen, to scan the ridge above. The man was good. He moved like he understood the jungle, like he knew how to read terrain. But he didn't know Harry was watching. He didn't know that Harry had already calculated the range, the windage, the lead time. The scout stepped into a small gap between the bamboo stalks. Just for a moment, just long enough, Harry raised the Garand smoothly, sighted through the iron sights, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked once, sharp and flat in the humid air. The scout dropped without a sound. Harry didn't wait to confirm the kill. He shifted position immediately, sliding 3 feet to the right, changing his angle. If there were other scouts, they'd heard the shot. They'd be marking his position. He needed to move. He needed to stay unpredictable. Nothing happened for 10 minutes. The jungle absorbed the sound of the gunshot and returned to its baseline hum. But Harry knew they were out there. He could feel them, watching, planning, testing. Then the first probe came. 3 men, moving fast through the undergrowth, trying to flank from the left. They thought they could use the gully for cover, work their way up the slope, and hit him from the side. But Harry had already mapped that route. He'd already prepared for it. He let them get halfway up the gully, let them think they were safe, and then he leaned out and dropped a grenade. The explosion tore through the ferns, shrapnel ripping through leaves and flesh. One man screamed. The others scrambled back downhill, dragging their wounded comrade. Harry didn't give them time to regroup. He fired 3 quick shots into the underbrush where they disappeared, forcing them to stay low, forcing them to retreat. Then he moved again, this time to the left side of the trench, changing his firing position, staying mobile. The second probe came 20 minutes later. This time they tried the right flank, moving through the dense foliage along the ridge, attempting to work their way behind him. Harry heard them before he saw them. The rustle of boots on wet leaves, the faint whisper of voices coordinating movement. He counted at least 4, maybe 5. They were trying to surround him. He waited until they were close, until he could hear their breathing. And then he opened fire. The Garand barked 8 times in rapid succession, the clip ejecting with metallic ping. 2 men went down immediately. The others scattered, returning fire blindly into the jungle. Bullets snapped through branches above Harry's head, thudding into tree trunks, kicking up dirt around the trench. He reloaded calmly, his hands moving on muscle memory, and fired again. Another man dropped. The survivors retreated, crashing through the underbrush, their discipline breaking. Harry didn't pursue. He stayed in his trench, stayed disciplined, stayed patient. By mid-afternoon, the Japanese had figured out that the forward post wasn't going to fall easily. They regrouped and changed tactics. Instead of small probing attacks, they launched a coordinated assault. Harry counted at least 15 men moving through the jungle below, advancing in a skirmish line, using covering fire to suppress his position. Bullets raked the sandbags, tearing through the camouflage, sending dirt and debris flying. Harry pressed himself flat against the bottom of the trench, letting the storm pass over him. Then, in the brief pause when they had to reload, he rose and fired. 1 shot, 2, 3, methodical, precise. Each shot found a target. The advancing line faltered. Men dove for cover, shouting orders, try to reorganize. But the momentum was broken. Harry dropped back into the trench, reloaded, and waited for the next wave. They came again 10 minutes later, this time with grenades. Harry heard the dull thump of explosions moving up the hillside. The Japanese tried to blast him out of his position. He curled into the deepest part of the trench, covering his head as shrapnel whined overhead. 1 grenade landed 5 feet away, detonating with a concussive blast that left his ears ringing and his vision blurred. But the sandbags held. The trench held. And when the smoke cleared, Harry was still there. He rose, shook off the dizziness, and started firing again. The Japanese had expected the grenades to finish him. They'd moved in close, thinking the position was neutralized. It was a fatal mistake. Harry cut down 3 men before they even realized he was still alive. The rest pulled back, stunned, their confidence shaken. The pattern repeated throughout the afternoon. Attack, repulse, regroup, attack again. Each time, the Japanese threw more men at the position. Each time, Harry held. He used every trick he learned hunting in the Minnesota woods. He never fired from the same spot twice. He varied his timing, sometimes shooting immediately, sometimes waiting until the enemy thought he was dead. He used the terrain, the foliage, the angles of the trench to create illusions, to make them think there were multiple defenders. He moved constantly, staying unpredictable, staying alive. His hands were steady. His breathing was controlled. He wasn't thinking about fear or death or the odds stacked against him. He was thinking about the next shot, the next target, the next second. By late afternoon, the ground around the trench was littered with bodies. Some had fallen in the clearing. Others were scattered through the bamboo thicket, sprawled in the gully, draped over fallen logs. Harry had stopped counting after 20. He didn't have time to count. He just kept firing. His rifle was hot, the barrel smoking, the stock slick with sweat and rain. His ammunition was running low. He had 2 clips left, maybe 16 rounds total, and 1 grenade. The Japanese knew he was weakening. They could sense it. They launched another assault, this one larger than all the others, a wave of men charging up the hillside with bayonets fixed, screaming as they came. Harry fired until the Garand's clip pinged empty, then grabbed his last grenade, pulled a pin, and hurled it into the center of the charge. The explosion stopped them cold, bodies tumbling backward, the charge collapsing into chaos. He reloaded his last clip and fired the remaining rounds methodically, picking off the stragglers, the ones who hadn't retreated fast enough. And then it was quiet. The jungle fell silent. The Japanese pulled back. Harry sat in the trench, his rifle across his lap, his hands trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. The sun was sinking behind the ridge, casting long shadows through the trees. He'd held the position for 8 hours. 8 hours against repeated assaults, against overwhelming numbers, against an enemy that had expected him to die in the first 30 minutes. He was still alive, and the position was still his. When the relief squad finally reached him at dusk, they found Harry sitting calmly in the trench, cleaning his rifle. The squad leader, a lieutenant from another platoon, stared at the carnage around the position and couldn't speak for a full minute. Bodies lay everywhere, scattered across the hillside like broken dolls. The lieutenant counted them later. 52 confirmed kills. 52 Japanese soldiers eliminated by 1 man in 1 afternoon. It didn't seem possible. It didn't seem real. But the evidence was undeniable. Harry had turned Dead Man's Perch into a graveyard. He'd transformed a suicide post into a fortress. He'd done what everyone said couldn't be done. The lieutenant asked him how he'd managed it. Harry just shrugged. "I grew up hunting deer," he said quietly. "You learn to wait. You learn to be patient. You don't take a shot unless you're sure." The lieutenant shook his head in disbelief and radioed back to headquarters. Within hours, word of Harry's stand had spread through the entire division. The suicide post wasn't a death trap anymore. It was a legend, and Harry Kelsen, the quiet farm boy from Minnesota, had become something else entirely. He'd become a ghost story, a nightmare, a symbol of what one determined soldier could do when the odds meant nothing and survival was the only goal that mattered. But Harry didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired. He felt numb. He looked at the bodies scattered around the trench and felt nothing but a hollow ache. These men had families, too. They'd had lives, dreams, reasons to fight. And now they were gone, erased in a single afternoon because someone had ordered them to take a hill and someone else had decided to defend it. War didn't make sense. It didn't have meaning. It was just violence and death, and the awful mathematics of who could kill faster. Harry climbed out of the trench, slinging his rifle over his shoulder, and walked back toward the main line with the relief squad. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The jungle would reclaim the bodies. The rain would wash away the blood. And in a few days, the position would be abandoned anyway, as the front line shifted and the battle moved elsewhere. Dead Man's Perch would become just another forgotten piece of ground, another footnote in a war full of forgotten places. But Harry's actions that day had consequences beyond the immediate battle. The Japanese command, upon discovering the devastation at the forward post, became convinced that the Americans had reinforced the position with a full platoon of elite snipers. They adjusted their tactics accordingly, pulling back from aggressive probing attacks and fortifying their own defensive lines. This caution bought the 96th Infantry Division critical time to regroup and resupply. What Harry had done alone, by sheer determination and skill, had shifted the tactical balance in that sector. The Japanese never attempted another assault on the ridgeline. They avoided the area entirely, treating it as a kill zone too dangerous to approach. Intelligence officers later estimated that Harry's stand had delayed a potential Japanese counteroffensive by at least 3 days, possibly saving hundreds of American lives. But none of that was known at the time. Harry was just a private who'd survived a bad assignment. He was rotated back to a reserve position the next day and spent a week recovering from exhaustion and minor shrapnel wounds. His platoon sergeant recommended him for a Silver Star. The paperwork was filed and then lost somewhere in the chaos of the campaign. Harry never received the medal. He didn't care. Medals didn't bring back Delaney or the dozens of other men who died on that ridge before him. Medals didn't explain why he'd lived when so many others hadn't. He just wanted to go home. He wanted to see the farm again, walk the fence lines, hear the cattle lowing in the early morning. He wanted to forget the smell of rotting leaves and old blood. The Battle of Leyte dragged on for months. Harry fought in a dozen more engagements, survived a dozen more close calls, and slowly built a reputation as a soldier who could be trusted in the worst situations. Other men wanted him in their squad. Officers quietly made sure he was assigned to key positions during critical operations. He never spoke about Dead Man's Perch. He never bragged or embellished. When other soldiers asked him about it, he'd just shrug and change the subject. The only time he mentioned it all was in a letter to his father, written in a rare moment of quiet during a lull in the fighting. He wrote, "I did what you taught me. I waited. I stayed patient. I didn't waste shots. I came home." He sealed the letter and sent it off and never spoke of it again. The war ended in August 1945. Harry was still in the Philippines when the news came through. He sat on a hillside overlooking the ocean and watched the sun set over the water, feeling nothing but a vast emptiness. He'd survived. That was all. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man who'd done what was necessary to stay alive. He was discharged in early 1946 and returned to Minnesota. The farm was still there, the land still green and rolling, the cattle still grazing in the pastures. His father met him at the train station and didn't ask questions. They drove home in silence. Harry went back to work, mending fences, milking cows, walking the same trails he'd walked as a boy. The rhythms of farm life slowly pulled him back from the edge. The nightmares faded. The memories dulled. He married a local girl in 1948, had 3 children, and spent the rest of his life working the land. He never told his wife about Dead Man's Perch. He never told his children. It was a part of his life that belonged to another world, a darker world, and he didn't want to bring that darkness home. But the story didn't die. Other veterans from a 96th Infantry Division carried it with them, passing along in reunions and memoirs. Historians researching the Battle of Leyte eventually pieced together what had happened on that ridge in October 1944. They found the after-action reports, the casualty lists, the scattered accounts from soldiers who'd witnessed the aftermath. They confirmed the numbers. 52 confirmed kills, 1 defender, 8 hours of sustained combat. It was one of the most remarkable defensive stands of the Pacific War, and it had been fought by a farm boy with a hunting rifle and the patience to outwait death itself. Military analysts studied Harry's tactics, trying to understand how he'd accomplished what he did. The key, they concluded, was discipline. Harry had never panicked. He'd never wasted ammunition. He'd used the terrain to his advantage, stayed mobile, and refused to fight on the enemy's terms. He'd turned a hopeless situation into a tactical masterpiece through sheer willpower and skill. In 1984, nearly 40 years after the battle, a military historian tracked Harry down to his farm in Minnesota and asked if he'd be willing to talk about his experience. Harry, now in his 60s and weathered by decades of hard work, listened politely and then shook his head. "I don't have anything to say," he told the historian. "I did my job. That's all." The historian pressed, explaining that Harry's story deserved to be remembered, that it was a testament to courage and ingenuity under impossible odds. Harry considered this for a moment, then said something that the historian never forgot. He said, "The real heroes are the ones who didn't come home. I was just lucky." And that was the end of the conversation. Harry refused all subsequent interview requests. He lived quietly, farmed his land, and passed away in 1992 at the age of 71. His obituary in the local newspaper mentioned that he'd served in World War II, but it didn't mention Dead Man's Perch. It didn't mention the 52 lives he'd taken to save his own. Most people who attended his funeral had no idea what he'd done half a century earlier on a jungle ridge in the Philippines. But the men who'd served with him knew. The veterans who'd heard the stories knew. And slowly, over the years, Harry's stand became part of the broader narrative of the Pacific War. It was taught in military academies as an example of defensive tactics. It was written about in books and articles. It was remembered by the soldiers who understood that war wasn't about glory or heroism. It was about survival. It was about ordinary men pushed to extraordinary limits, doing whatever it took to see the next sunrise. Harry Kelsen had been one of those men. He hadn't asked for fame. He hadn't wanted recognition. He just wanted to live. And on that October day in 1944, he'd proven that sometimes one man in the right place, with the right skills and the right mindset, could hold back an entire army. The position he defended was never officially commemorated. No monument was erected. No plaque was placed. The jungle reclaimed the ridge decades ago, and today there's nothing left to mark the spot where Harry Kelsen turned a suicide post into a legend. But the story endures. It endures in the memories of the soldiers who fought alongside him. It endures in the history books that document the Battle of Leyte. It endures in the understanding that courage isn't always loud or flashy. Sometimes courage is quiet. Sometimes it's patient. Sometimes it's a farm boy sitting in a trench, waiting for the next target, refusing to give up, refusing to break, refusing to let the enemy win. Harry Kelsen embodied that kind of courage. He didn't do it for medals or glory. He did it because it was his job, and because he believed that if you were going to do something, you did it right. That mindset, more than any tactic or technique, was what allowed him to survive Dead Man's Perch. It was what allowed him to eliminate 52 enemy soldiers in a single day and walk away alive. And maybe that's the real lesson of Harry's story. It's not about the body count or the tactical brilliance. It's about the power of discipline, patience, and determination. It's about refusing to accept defeat, even when defeat seems inevitable. It's about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, not because they're special, but because the situation demands it and they choose to rise to the challenge. Harry Kelsen was one of those people. He was a farmer who became a soldier who became a legend, and a legend who went back to being a farmer. He lived his life with quiet dignity, never seeking recognition, never boasting about what he'd done. And in the end, that humility, that refusal to be defined by one day of violence, is perhaps the most remarkable thing about him. He understood that war was just a chapter in his life, not the whole story. He understood that survival was a gift, not an achievement. And he understood that the real measure of a man wasn't what he did in battle, but how he lived when the battle was over. Harry Kelsen's story is a reminder that history is full of unsung heroes. Men and women who did extraordinary things and then returned to ordinary lives, carrying their burdens in silence, asking for nothing in return. These are the people who hold the line when everything is falling apart. These are the people who, when told they're in a suicide post, decide to make it someone else's grave instead. Harry was one of them. And though he's been gone for more than 30 years, his story lives on, a testament to the power of one determined individual to change the course of events, to defy the odds, and to prove that sometimes, just sometimes, one person really can make all the difference. If this story moved your heart even once, subscribe. It's the least tribute we can give to men like him.